Hi there. Welcome to another in the series of TrustTalks, a series of mobile network security conversations featuring myself, Patrick Donegan with Hardenstance, and also AdaptiveMobile Security, who today is represented by two of their most senior executives, Brian Collins, Chief Executive, and Cathal Mc Daid, Chief Technology Officer. We're going to start, as we usually do, with a segment on adaptive mobile security. First and foremost, we are going to be talking about what is actually the most significant development in the company's history, their recent acquisition by Enea. Brian is going to be sharing what that means for the company and hopefully maybe sharing one or two bits and pieces about what that might mean in terms of adaptive mobile security's upcoming roadmap opportunities. Next up, we're going to be talking about a major news event, which you may well have read about in the press over the course of the last few weeks, which is the release by a number of newspapers and interested parties of research they have done on the use or indeed misuse of the NSO Group's mobile spyware Pegasus. They've done a great deal of research on that, published a lot of material which has gained headlines around the world. I will be discussing what that means with Cathal. The last of our sections, which we usually call What's Going On Out There, is something I'm especially excited about, which is that Adaptive Mobile Security is going to be the diamond sponsor of Hardenstance's first ever virtual half-day cybersecurity event. I'm going to be hosting the Telecom Threat Intelligence Summit. I'm going to be hosting it on October the 20th. And as I said, Adaptive Mobile Security is going to be the diamond sponsor of that event, together with a great deal more very important speakers. I will talk about that with Cathal as well. So on to the second segment, talking about Adaptive Mobile Security itself, the company. Brian Collins, CEO of Adaptive Mobile Security, welcome. Nice to have you with us.
Good afternoon, Patrick. Nice to see you again.
Great. So we've got some extraordinarily important news, but let's first talk about an important thing that you want to talk about, which is a new 5G dimension to SMS security that you guys are launching a paper on. Tell us about that briefly.
Yes, Patrick. I mean, as you're aware, we have long been involved in the whole area of securing messaging and SMS, RCS, MMS. And a lot of people have come and queried where SMS, for instance, will play in 5G and what are the security implications. So very soon, with the work of our research team and our tech team, we will launch a very extensive document, a white paper that will give a clear insight as to where we believe SMS will sit in the 5G landscape. Also the security concerns, but we certainly see messaging and SMS being an absolute core part of 5G going forward, and this document will give a greater insight into it.
That sounds good. It sounds interesting, but nowhere near as important, let's be honest, as the remarkable news that you shared, you disclosed a few weeks ago, which is that Adaptive Mobile Security is being bought by Enea. Now, I could show you reports and comments that I've made in the public domain about M&A activity. And honestly, sometimes you see some M&A activity, some firms buying another, and you look at it, and you kind of scratch your head a little bit and you go, what on earth is that all about? In all candor, I looked at Enea acquiring Adaptive Mobile Security, and immediately I liked it. I liked the potential synergies of the two very much indeed. So let's see. I can share a little bit why I like it. But what about you? What's the rationale here?
Sure. So, first let me tell you a little bit about Enea, Patrick. Enea are a Swedish company. We're fortunate insofar as Enea are a public company. They're listed on the Swedish NASDAQ. Right. And that, clearly ticked two boxes for us. One, Enea is around almost 50 years. They're a public company 20 years. So they have the rich telecom heritage, from being Swedish, and two, they have access to capital, which we've always indicated when the time was right, was critical for adaptive mobile security. So, from day one, when we had the initial engagement with them, and we've known them for quite a few years, Patrick, they were obviously, straight away we saw them as a prospective acquirer of the company. Unfortunately, that came to pass. It was a pretty quick transaction. We had other offers, but it's, as I, without overplaying the Jaws analogy, we needed a bigger boat. We needed a bigger boat for Cathal and his team. We needed access to capital to grow for the opportunities we'd seen. We see the carrier space absolutely dependent on specialized companies, specialized security companies specifically in the space. And so from that standpoint, without giving the usual CEO propaganda, Patrick, it was an ideal marriage.
Right. And you mentioned obviously they're strong in telecom. What are some of the core parts of the telecom portfolio?
So as I say, they're almost 50 years old. They have built up a strong they have acquired, they've made an acquisition the last one a year for the last 3 to 4 years. So they have a very strong library of different technologies, which we believe were, not only exciting, but extremely complementary and synergistic with what we had. Not only that, but what we had, but where we were going, which was absolutely critical, and staying on top of where the market is moving to. As you know, we not only sell to carriers, we also work with governments in ensuring that the confidence and integrity of mobile networks are maintained. And this is critical for carriers to to try and to get back their investment in 5G, that people have the confidence in the network. And as you indicated earlier on, there has been many articles in the paper which indicate that confidence is something which is not particularly high at the moment post certain revelations.
Yeah. So you mentioned the capital. You mentioned also the telecom portfolio, but also let's face it, what you guys do is extremely sensitive. You're in a very sensitive part of the network, and you're involved in managing and monitoring the security of that environment. So I guess not any acquirer would have worked for your customers, and these guys obviously did. What is it about Enea that works from a kind of political standpoint, shall we say?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, Patrick. I mean, obviously this session is called TrustTalks. As you know, I've been a long exponent which indicates that the concept of trust being used in the exchange of telecom traffic, that trust is not a security policy. No one should trust anyone anymore, as has been proven. Right. And hope is certainly not a national security strategy, that you hope your telecoms are secure. So on that point, it was, the alignment of roadmaps where we both believe the market was going, which was extremely aligned. We believe services, and obviously we have a very strong model where we sell software and we sell analyst insight and we sell intelligence. That worked well with their cyber focus, and they have always portrayed themselves as both a network and cyber security company. So from day one, that aligned. I mean, obviously for our investors, there had to be alignment on price. Unfortunately, that worked well. We had a significant interest in the company. We see, so certain areas for us that allow us move from the signaling to the IP onto the user plane, which we had plans to do. This will be significantly accelerated by being able to access some of Enea's group technologies, which will save us both time, save us money, and get us to the market a lot quicker to provide a landscape of technologies that we believe no one will be able to match.
Right, but just politically speaking, Enea is a Swedish company. The Swedes, as a general rule, don't annoy anybody very much, so that made them a pretty good fit, right? Yeah,
no, absolutely, and that was critical. We've customers throughout the world. It was going to be very, very hard to get someone that wasn't going to be upset by it, but all our customers have embraced it. They see the logic in it, and very grateful to you, Patrick, for identifying, very early on that it made so much both commercial and technical sense.
Yeah. So I think if we, you've talked about, there's no real overlap. It's not as though this isn't in any way a case of a company eliminating a competitor. There's none of that. It's all highly complementary. But I guess one of the issues is that your customers in the telco are quite, yours and Enea's are probably in different departments at this point in time. Would you agree with that? So and how do you bring that together?
Sure. So, I mean, there's, any acquisition, as a CEO, you look from three key standpoints: one from the customer standpoint, one from a market standpoint, and then, of course, from a technical standpoint. The great thing, without overstating it, is there was zero overlap in those three areas from a market, customer, and technology standpoint. Once again, as a security company, we have always ended up either, it's only recently the chief security officer has kind of come to the fore. So you see that in the big US carriers.
Within the telcos, yeah.
Yeah, in the telcos, and whereas we're still in a lot of networks, the CTO, the chief technical officer, has control of the data layer. So we believe that's absolutely that the alignment between the data and the security side we are already seeing that converge. Obviously, under 5G, you see IP and signaling technologies converge. So yes, listen, we have a bit of introductory work to do and what we do, and clearly outline where we're going with our both our technologies and our analyst capability. But we do not believe, Patrick, that it will. We don't believe. We believe people will identify the synergy and the technical benefit very, very quickly.
Let's look a little bit into the roadmap a little bit now, and I think potentially one of the things that Enea is most known for is its DPI capabilities. And I think one of the most interesting possibilities, and it'd be interesting to see if you're willing to share some of this with us, is that I associate AdaptiveMobile Security with very much the kind of control plane world. That's where you come from. If you take Enea's DPI capability and apply that on the user side to the GTPU, and you start to integrate GTPU and GTPC monitoring and security capabilities, you start to get something pretty interesting, where you'd start to actually compete on the side of the fence that the Palo Alto Networks and A10s and Junipers of this world compete on. What are your thoughts there? Is that a direction you want to share with us?
Well, I don't want to say too much because obviously we are just new to the family, but we've clearly outlined, and Cathal, who you'll hear later from a CTO standpoint, has outlined his ambition, which is entirely aligned with me, which is that our intention is to play in that area.
Right.
We believe that we will have a combination of both technologies. We will see layers of traffic and the capability from a pure play security standpoint, as was manifest in some of the revelations in the last couple of weeks, Patrick, is to be able to correlate traffic across a number of, different planes. So be the control plane, be the user plane. We believe, without overstating it, the carriers need help in this. I mean, the level of innovation that is going in to attack them, not only their networks, but the phones that operate on their network, which the carriers have very little to do, and the use of encrypted technologies. This is clearly going to extend significantly, Patrick, over 5G. And not just 5G, I mean, 4G already has well-documented significant vulnerabilities which are being exposed, and we see every minute of the day. But without portraying too much detail, because we're working on that right now, but you've indicated Enea, acquired Cosmos, which is a very, very strong DPI engine. I think it's realistic to promote the fact that, yes, you will see a stronger DPI data IP side being incorporated into our technologies.
Well, that's really exciting, and I would imagine that telco security people all over the world would be really pretty excited to hear that and look forward to the innovation that comes with that. Very interesting indeed. I think, Brian, anything else you'd like to add about the Enea acquisition, what it means to you?
Not at all, but you maybe not at the moment, but you'll certainly be hearing from us because, we believe we have a trumpet to blow and we'll blow it hard, but we want to make sure, we get our, we're advising our customers of where we're going, what our roadmap is. That's going to take us a little while. Meanwhile, Cathal and his team are working with the other different divisions and the technologies in the group. But listen, for now, Patrick, I'm very grateful to you for giving us the insight. But yeah, you'll hear a lot from us, and we believe we will bring a layer of security to the carrier and to the different aspects of the different layers within the carrier very shortly, and keep subscribers and their data safe.
So a Jaws analogy to start with and a Dizzy Gillespie analogy to finish with. Thanks, Brian.
Absolutely. Okay, many thanks, Patrick.
Thanks very much indeed.
Bye.
So to the main topic of the day, which is the Pegasus project. And I'm joined, it just appeared, by Cathal Mc Daid, the CTO of AdaptiveMobile. How are you doing, Cathal?
Hi, Patrick. How are you doing? Good to talk to you.
You too. So we're going to be talking about the Pegasus project. Now, Pegasus, as you may well know, is the name of the smartphone spyware or malware, depending on how you want to look at it, of the Israeli software vendor NSO. It's been around for years. It's been controversial for years. Project Pegasus is the collaboration of a number of human rights organizations and media outlets to publish information they've obtained about the usage of Pegasus by nation states over the course of the last few months. They published that information on July the 19th. Let's be very clear, the findings of Project Pegasus are controversial, and I'm going to try and summarize that as objectively as possible. Security researchers have generally acknowledged that the Pegasus project research into the delivery infrastructure of Pegasus and the forensics carried out on some of the victims' iPhones is of very good quality indeed. It proves pretty conclusively that the smartphones of some journalists, politicians, and campaigners were indeed infected with Pegasus in violation of the terms upon which the NSO licenses the technology. That much is clear. Anyone that cares about individual freedom, liberty, democracy, all that good stuff, a free press, should be unhappy, alarmed, and motivated to find ways to get those abuses corrected. And I stand very much as one of those types of people. I would share with you my response to the CEO of the NSO Group when he told Forbes in July that if you're not a criminal, don't be afraid. I would share my response to that, but I doubt that the language I would use would persuade AdaptiveMobile to invite me to appear with them ever again. I don't buy that view of the world at all, and I hope that many of you don't either. However, what is a lot more controversial is the list of 50,000 smartphone numbers targeted by Pegasus customers that the researchers say they came across. This is the really controversial part, because 50,000 is a very big number, and that's what's been at the center of many of the media headlines around the world. The Project Pegasus folks have been a little bit dissembling, they're a little bit fuzzy, a little bit opaque about what that list of 50,000 targets represents and how they obtained it, which inevitably casts some doubt on its veracity. NSO themselves claim it was derived from using HLR lookups. Again, we do know that when the forensics were done on some of these 50,000 phones targeted, it turned out that they had indeed been infected by Pegasus. But that's just a handful of those 50,000 alleged targets. The veracity of that 50,000 number is still very much open to question, I would think. Now, Cathal, as I mentioned, this is a very controversial area. You're going to recognize that as well. What would you say about the way I represented that? Did I get it mostly right? A little bit wrong here and there? What are your first thoughts?
Hi, Patrick. No, I think you summed it up very, very well. It is a complex and it is a controversial topic. I mean, it's fair to say that NSO Group and the Pegasus software has been the poster child for the surveillance industry for many, many years now. This is almost certainly more publicity than they expected or they wanted, being the poster child. From our perspective, and we'll talk about this, but from our perspective, all publicity in this area is good. People aren't sometimes forget or are possibly not aware of the abilities and the sheer power that these companies can achieve with their software. It's great for some of these news reports to actually put a human face on people who's been affected, so people can actually see that, you know, it's not the types of people that possibly NSO Group purport to be that are being tracked. These people are not criminals. These people are not under whatever terms you want to call them. A lot of these people are ordinary people, journalists that are doing their job. So all this publicity is good. We see ourselves in our business, day-to-day business, we try to detect and block these surveillance companies from happening. So from our perspective, the more we can talk about them, better. But as you've touched upon it here, I mean, there are some questions about this whole area. There are some questions about the reports. But, you know, we think the research is very, very credible. Like you said yourself, The results look good. They have found traces of the spyware on the handsets. So from that point on, it has contributed immensely to the conversation.
Right. So now let's look at the origins of this list of 50,000 target phones. What do you make of that, Cathal? Now, very particularly, the NSO CEO making the case that the 50,000 targets was derived by HLR lookup. You guys know a pretty good amount about mobile networks. You know your HLRs inside out. What do you make of that assertion that that's where this list came from?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I mean, I think the Pegasus project, by being a little bit vague about the origins of this, I don't think they did themselves any favors.
Right.
But I don't think it takes away from the quality of their research, but the vagueness about this is introduce some questions which perhaps there shouldn't have been. HLR lookups, we looked at this ourselves. We do see surveillance companies use HLR lookups. That's a perfectly credible method for them to use to do their attacks. Now, the strange thing is that the NSO Group themselves, like you mentioned, they actually suggested this. This is where it possibly came from. That doesn't necessarily mean it came from that, but it's somewhat unusual that they would suggest this themselves. From our perspective, from looking at the list, there's a few things to remember. It's a bit confusing when you look at the list, but it's actually, when you look at it, the reports that they have, it's not 50,000 from 1 year. It's not necessarily even from 2 years. It's basically what we believe is a sequence of possibly overlapping series of numbers from up to possibly 4 years.
Oh.
So some of the reports that they were saying, and the NSO Group were saying that this is impossible because 50,000. Nowhere did the Pegasus project, although it's not exactly clear, this is one of their failings, they didn't actually say it was ever 50,000 in one particular year. Those numbers are actually taken from different points over a 4-year period, and some of them happen to be 1 year, 2 year periods, but are from different points. As whether this could be happen from a use from a HLR lookup list, it could very well happen. We have seen ourselves, and we've reported, I've spoken at conferences, people using HLR lookups. Is very, very common. 50,000 is a drop in the ocean compared to that. Volumes are not a problem. But there has been other reports as well. It may not come from a HLR lookup. There has been reports of a hacked NSO Group servers in Cyprus around the time. And the interesting thing about it is that didn't actually come, those weren't reported to be from NSO Group, but possibly from another company which has been connected to NSO Group called Circles. So whether it came from an actual commercial HLR lookup provider or not remains to be seen, but there is certainly seems to be a strong correlation between those numbers on that list and people who are actually being spied because they found spyware on some of those phones.
I think NSO rejected pretty aggressively the idea that it was one of their own servers, did they not?
Yes, I think they did. And, you got two different questions there. One is, obviously themselves, if what they are saying is essentially truthful or not, that's their decision. It's hard for people on the outside to make that judgment.
Yeah.
And that's the same that they were. I mean, there's ways that, you can interpret these statements. You can be entirely correct on a strict manner, but it may be not one of their servers. For example, in some of their reports, they have stated that some of these other groups, like Circles, have no relationship to them. And that is, strictly speaking, correct. But actually, there's certain holding companies which are in the background, which is all being laid out by NGOs who've done research in them. So from those strict legal perspective, they may be correct. But again, it's concentrating on the HLR list or the list itself and its origins, that sort of takes people away from the actual methods and the actual evidence that has been obtained. If you start focusing on one small part, there does seem to be results that when they've looked at these phones, they have found spyware. And when we, in our own industry, when we look for it, we do see surveillance companies use HLR lookups. So those are all known techniques.
Right. Okay. Now, one of the issues, and I was fascinated in your use of the word poster child because it speaks to one of the questions I wanted to ask you. One of the issues with Pegasus, the Project Pegasus, is that it really puts the spotlight on NSO. And okay, fine, the spotlight kind of does belong on NSO, but a problem with it is that it kind of gives the impression to the mainstream world that NSO is some unique kind of actor in this space, whereas this whole environment of spyware and the infrastructure, the delivery infrastructure that's used to distribute it and support it and monitor it and use it is actually far, 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 far bigger than NSO. So in that sense, that spotlight is kind of unhelpful and takes the spotlight off of everybody else. Now, you guys see a lot of this activity, and you're familiar with a lot of the actors in this market. What can you share with us, obviously at a discrete level, in terms of the scale of this whole ecosystem of spyware actors and the infrastructure that supports it, and the modus operandi that supports it?
Yeah, NSO Group are quite unusual in the surveillance industry world. That I won't say that they seek the spotlight, but they are in the spotlight.
Right.
The most of the other surveillance companies we are aware of, they don't want the spotlight. It's not in their interest to be in the spotlight. Sometimes some of them don't have web addresses, they don't have email, they don't have web addresses, don't have a public presence, and if they are pointed out, they're quickly taken down. So you are right. It is unhelpful when people think, let's say, if let's say, imagine a world NSO Group went out of business, that the problem is solved. It's absolutely not solved. There's a whole enormous industry behind this, and most of these companies would much rather that their shadow be a lot larger than their public presence.
Yeah.
So from our perspective, when we are active, obviously on the core networks. We work with our customers or mobile operators, and they try to detect and block attacks over core networks. And from our perspective, the malicious activity, ignoring noise and other superfluous activity, the vast majority of malicious activity we see is generated by surveillance companies. And we're quite confident by those assumptions due to many years of doing this. It's not really, and we don't believe it's governments themselves doing it. There's also a small criminal element, but the majority of malicious activity, pure malicious activity, which is a small percentage, but this malicious activity is generated by surveillance companies. And the reason we think this happens is that countries don't have the expertise or don't have the time and they don't want to wait to build this technology themselves. They would much rather facilitate or use one of these surveillance companies to do it for them. And so this produces this drive, this incentive for this industry. And then there is a whole host of, not many, but there is certainly between maybe 20 to 5 or 5 to 20 different companies who try to offer these facilities to these governments.
Right. Now, in terms of solutions, obviously, a lot of the conversation around solution revolves around regulation, around tighter restrictions on licensing, revolves around politics, all very, very valid stuff, all very important stuff. However, it's not going to get people, to solutions anytime soon. What most people, what most high-profile individuals do, who are worried about this kind of spyware, who believe themselves rightly to be the kind of the tier one of targets, if you will, is they buy special high-end, very expensive software to run on their smartphones, and much of that software is actually pretty effective, to be fair. But we don't actually see that much in terms of the mobile networks themselves, the mobile operators themselves, attempting to deliver solutions that would render that smartphone software unnecessary. What can mobile operators do to be on the side of their customers against this type of spyware that we've seen with Pegasus and others?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the whole conversation was very interesting from my perspective to see several days of the top world's media covering mobile malware and spyware. And the whole conversation seemed to revolve around the people being attacked on one side, the phones that they were using, and then on the other side, the people allegedly doing the attacking NSO Group. And everything in between was sort of essentially ignored. There was no conversation about what the operators were doing, even that they were present.
Right.
And clearly, because we work with them, we clearly believe that the operators do have a place to play in this whole conversation. Now, the exact method of the technique as we go to press, hasn't actually been revealed. The comments or some of the intelligence is possibly an iMessage, at least for the Apple case, is an iMessage type of hack. There may not be much an operator can do there, but they are aware of these surveillance companies can be active on other bearers, like the bearers that we are active on. So this touches on an area I know that's close to your heart, Patrick, but in the area of intelligence sharing, this is possibly something which could be shared with and by the mobile operators to other actors who are working in the space, such as maybe the mobile handset vendors or other security vendors. So there is, I think, definitely more that operators could do. And one thing is that maybe if people felt it was safe to do so, if they are being targeted, they could possibly, ask even their mobile operator, do you have any information on this? Because at this point in time, I would suspect that a lot of people who might think they're being targeted don't even think to talk to the mobile operator or even involve them in the conversation. The same with the ecosystem vendors such as Apple or Google. I mean, are they involving the mobile operators in the conversation? Maybe they help. Maybe they can't fix the exact problem, but they do and would know information about other attacks from the other bearers, which could be added together. Attackers like these succeed because they essentially divide us. They focus on one particular part versus a different part, and they believe in the industry isn't joined up. But the more joined up we are, the better then we can actually detect and stop these types of attacks.
You make a good point. I mean, I think if business federations, chambers of commerce, and what have you, were to put their mind to lobbying their local operators in their domestic markets for this kind of capability, it becomes harder for operators to resist that kind of customer demand, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. The more voices asking for the same thing comes a stronger voice. I mean, also, one thing is that these attackers, from personal experience, we may have a danger of we big them up too much. They're not omnipotent. They're not infallible. Right. Like the latest versions of malware they have, yes, people think that they're very complex, that they live in memory, so that, there's no detection. But the more complex you become, the more delicate you also become. Simple things like switching your phone off and then switching it on fully will defeat the malware. So the more that we share information, the more techniques we do, is that you'll be surprised how possibly easy it is to make a difference to these very complex attacks simply by sharing information.
Right. Okay, very good. Well, that's terrific talking about Pegasus. Cathal, let's now move on to our third and final section, which we always finish on, which is what else is going on out there. And on this occasion, we're going to basically talk about me. We're going to talk about the fact that we have Hardened Stance's very first ever half-day virtual event coming up on October the 20th. It's called the Telecom Threat Intelligence Summit, TTIS 2021, and perhaps most exciting of all, I'm pleased to say that AdaptiveMobile Security is the diamond sponsor of the event. Now, I'm obviously immensely excited about it because it's Hardened Stance's first event, but Cathal, as a customer of mine, what are you looking forward to getting out of the event?
I'm really looking forward to this, not obviously because you'll be presenting it as your event, Patrick, that is a given, but I think it's something like this is timely and long overdue, that getting people involved together and sharing information, how we, like literally what we just talked about, sharing information amongst the community and amongst others. From ourselves, when I sort of pitch what we're talking about the information sharing that we do within Adaptive, and also how we propose to improve information sharing throughout the community. But I think this can only help everybody, because I think the days are long gone when you can just simply sell a security solution and then walk away and expect it's fixed. That right. Doesn't happen anymore. We're up against very resourceful people, as surely as we've seen from the NSO Pegasus revelations. These are very resourceful people who do not stop, who try to avoid your defenses. So we have to share information, because otherwise you're simply repeating the same lessons that other people might learn. And if we have to do is, we only get one chance to, or we have to get it right all the time. They have to get it right only once. The more information we share, the better chances we get it right all the time. So I think this type of event that you're going to be chairing and leading, it's essential, and hopefully this will become one of many events that we can have in this area.
Indeed. Well, let me conclude by sharing with our audience some of the other sponsors and participants we have. We have Les Wong, who leads the Cyber Defense Center for TELUS in Canada. We have Thomas Serzic speaking. Thomas is the Chief Security Officer of Deutsche Telekom. We have Tristan Morgan from BT. We have David Rogers from the GSM Association. Michael Daniel, the President of the Cyber Threat Alliance. Ed Amoroso, former Chief Security Officer of AT&T. Kieran Martin, former head of the NCSC here in the UK, and amongst other sponsors, apart from AdaptiveMobile, we also have Nokia, Eclectic IQ, Fortinet, NetScout, and Ericsson. Everyone attending this call will, I'm sure, will receive a means of registering for the event, and we will hope to see you there, where there will be so much more to tell you all about. That's it, I think, for another Trust Talks. Thank you very much indeed to Brian and Cathal for joining me today. Great seeing you, Cathal.
Great to be here, Patrick. Thanks for having me on.
Likewise, and thank you very much, everybody. And oh, there's Brian. Brian, how could I have left you out?
How could you?
Thanks very much indeed.
No, thank you, Patrick. Many thanks. Take care.
Great pleasure. Nice for you to pop back again.
All the best. Thank you.
And we'll see you all next time. Thank you for listening in.